My last item, Mr. Moderator, is I think we should avoid romanticizing too much about this Indonesia with 6.4% growth, etc., member of G20. Yeah? I think there was a question, can it last? You know? It cannot last if the leadership is not more firm in cases where disunity can happen. Theoretically, it's understandable, you know, with speed up modernization, you destabilize a traditional society, especially where religion is so important in Indonesia. And as I said, statistically, 15% are non-Islam. It's not the complete story, you know. The 15 or perhaps 20%, they live in pockets of communities. Yeah? If small bands of fanatic youth groups under the banner of religion are allowed to commit atrocities, that's clearly against the penal code, you know. And yet the answer is we have to investigate that with a task force. If we tolerate that longer, you know, then the potentials to become another eye in the brick, that potential, I think, will be unrealized. Let's stop there, and I hope there are questions from the floor that the panel will respond. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sabam. I think we'll probably be allowed about 5 minutes to have some questions or any comments on this general theme of breaking the mould, because I think we've heard a number of ideas about that, including using the CEPA negotiations as a way of breaking the mould, whether it's labour mobility or quarantine moulds or service moulds, whatever. I think it's really a big opportunity for business on both sides to try and set our relationship onto a different sort of trajectory for the future. So can I ask if there are any comments or questions to the panel? Yes, Shane Stone.
It's a question. Why do you separate Bali out from Indonesia on your polling? Is there a reason for that?
Quite a few people had speculated to me, well, over the years I've been running this poll, that perhaps Australians didn't understand that Bali was part of Indonesia and that they had much more favourable views towards Bali than Indonesia. So we decided to test that, and the results from last year were, I think, 57 for Bali and 54 for Indonesia, and statistically that's within the margin of error. So you could give the Australians the benefit of the doubt and say that they knew that they were the same place. Sorry? The end of the question was, it was countries around the world, and then at the end of the question it said, and how would you rate the island? How would you rate Bali? So it wasn't. We made it clear that it wasn't considered. You know, it wasn't a specific. It wasn't trying to confuse people that it was a country or anything, like mislead people.
Thanks very much, Fergus. Yes, Michael.
I'd like to follow up on something that Fergus said, and then other speakers then followed up on it. Fergus said how to develop a constructive narrative about Indonesia. Bruce, any ideas to improve the relationship? And Sabam, is there a permanent theme that can present a positive image? I think that we need a constructive narrative about what we share in our history. And following on from Shane Stone, because I think Shane was in Darwin, I'm not sure if he's still in the Northern Territory, we do know that there's a national history curriculum being developed in Australia. And it seems to me that one narrative that we could really benefit from in this country is an understanding that all Australians have, that we share a 400-year history, particularly on the northern coastal areas of Australia, both the north and the northeast coast, a 400-year history of peaceful economic cultural, historic, economic exchange between Sulawesi and northeastern Australia, but very few young Australians growing up in schools in this country know anything about it. If we did just one thing in terms of presenting all Australians with a constructive historical narrative about what we share, that's what I would suggest it be.
Thanks very much, Michael.
Look, yeah, thanks, Michael. Look, I think you're right. I mean, I guess one of the figures that always worries me, that was part of, I think it was either Fergus's or the Indonesia Business Council's own sort of work, was the fact that I think this year there's some 15 to 20,000 Indonesians studying in Australia, and I think there are 60 Australians studying in Indonesia. In my view, I think we need a Colombo plan, but in reverse. We need to send more Australians to Indonesia to actually understand Indonesia and to sort of embed themselves in the Indonesian sort of culture. I think that's a way that you start to tell the story. At the moment, we've got 15,000 Indonesians who go home with a knowledge of Australia, a knowledge of the culture, the language, the business practices, and it's to their benefit. We've got a whole generation of people growing up without any knowledge of that culture, of that language, and it's us who are going to be at a disadvantage as Indonesia does take its place on the world stage.
Thanks. Sabam?
Yeah, your suggestion, although interesting, to me is too remote, you know. I mean, I would say show to the young Indonesians and young Australians the map and talk a bit about the future. That we are destined to work together with the changing Asia around us. For Indonesians, of course, the piece of modernity is Australia. I mean, as Gita said, even his children, instead of going to the United States, it's Australia. Yeah? And I think for Australians, there's now a new generation of Australians. They used to be set between Sydney and London as nothing. Yeah? But even since 1945, Indonesians are more and more, Indonesia is more and more on the horizon of Australians. So I think a narrative can be done, can be written, can be presented, that we do need each other.
Jamie Mackey from the ANU. One of the positive developments that we might try to work on over the next couple of years is more contact between AIBC, the business community, and the academic community in Australia. Between the 1960s and the 1990s, Australia built up a core of Indonesia experts which is unrivaled anywhere else in the world. I'm not confident we'll have anything resembling this in 20 or 30 years' time, because the number of students in schools and in first year at universities taking Indonesian is collapsing disastrously. There was a conference in Perth a couple of weeks ago, and a very good article was written in the Australian about it 2 weeks ago, which emphasised, just how serious this lack is. Now, I've been conscious for a long time that the academic community tend not to communicate with you people, and conversely, I've rather got the impression here today that no one here is very concerned with the academic community. This is not a matter for blame on either side, but it is a matter where I think both sides need to see what we can do to remedy the issue. Can I just make one more point that I think is terribly important? There was an article a year or so ago in the Australian where the former head of Defence Forces in Australia was talking about the day when Indonesia will have a population of 400 million. It's well known that Indonesia will reach something like zero population growth later this century at a figure somewhere around 280, 290 million. Fertility rate in Java, at least, is already below replacement level. This is a terribly important fact for Australians to be aware of, and one very rarely hears anything about it. But it's something that we all here should be spreading around in Australia to contradict the old notion that Indonesia somehow represents a threat to Australia. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jamie. Anyone with one final question or comment?
Pak Sabam, this question about your comment about, don't romanticize your growth, like Indonesian growth, 6.4%, and then, so on and so forth. I guess it's hinged upon the leader in Indonesia to bring that, forward, and then to keep that sustainable growth moving forward. So I would like to get your, I suppose, personal opinion. Who will be, I guess, in this 2014, there'll be elections coming up. And, there's, I guess, from what I read, there's a positioning of presidency and, parties starting to gearing up to that notion. Would you be able to give a bit of your insight? I mean, it's off the record, I suppose. Who do you think is the serious contender for this, and who can bring Indonesia to sustainable growth?
I think we have 1 minute of analysis coming up.
Not off the record. I'm doing a bit of political consultancy, but I wonder whether you can afford me. No comment.
Look, thank you very much, everyone. We've heard a lot about communication. That's clearly extremely important, and I'm very impressed by the way in which actually we've been able to communicate today during the whole of the session. Very frank and I think very constructive sorts of comments that have been sort of launched across the so-called divide. Well, in fact, I think we've shown in many ways that we can work together. And Juwandi's comments about partnership, I think, are very important. And I certainly think that communication is not a problem between Australia and Indonesia. Getting media attention, I think, is a problem, but I think Australians and Indonesians communicate exceptionally well together, whether it's in private or in public. And I think that an Indonesian populace which, during the Governor Sutioso affair, was able to fly a spanduk outside the Australian embassy saying, "Bill, fuck off," I think has shown a remarkable capacity to communicate across cultural barriers. So in that spirit, let us continue our work.